1. We are live. Welcome everybody. We are back for another podcast. I'm solo. I didn't actually tell you this, but Jason is out coaching today, and I actually have another coach that's going to be on today with me, Jermaine Hodge, which is pretty cool. I reached out to Jermaine. We've kind of really casually and indirectly crossed paths a couple times, but this is the first time we've actually talked semi face-to-face here, even though you're in Iowa right now.
Right.
I appreciate you carving out a little bit of time. I'll just to let people know, if you don't know who Jermaine is, first and foremost, you are in the military, which thank you for your service, which to me is huge. I do a bunch of work in the tactical field, and so thank you for that. I believe you Army medic, is that correct?
Army medic.
Yeah, so I could use a guy like you out in the elk woods with me.
Well, if it gets like that, then we in bad situation. So hopefully you ain't gonna
No,
need me.
I like to make sure I got my bases covered in case.
Oh, okay, backup plans.
Yeah, right. So, and then to kind of add to that, Jermaine also works with the World Class Athlete Program within the Army, and he's a decorated wrestler, been with Team USA for multiple years, and now is on the coaching side, I believe, with the women's team. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
so very cool. We through the little bit of conversation we've had, with a little bit of common threads. I trained college wrestlers for quite a while. Love wrestling. So we actually had a mutual friend that's in the WCAP program that we kind of talked about the other day, and so it's cool to see you part of that. I actually have some colleagues of mine in the strength conditioning world that work down where you're at, Fort Carson, probably some different buildings. But you are on the road, and most importantly, why we're here today is we're going to talk a little bit about some hunting, which I think everybody likes.
Absolutely. I always carve out some time to talk about hunting.
To kind of, I think that's kind of a good conduit, because you grew up in North Carolina. Is that correct?
Correct.
So how does a guy from North Carolina go from there? I think there's obviously a pretty natural progression. We talk about your wrestling career, end up in Colorado Springs, go from Colorado Springs to becoming an elk hunter, to a world champion elk caller. Let's talk about that
so
first.
It could be a very lengthy story, but I'll give you a rundown of how it all formulated. I wanted to join the military and wrestle for the military, and I took a long route to get around to becoming a part of the World Class Athlete Program. And so I joined my junior year in college, joined the military, and lo and behold, they sent me off to Korea. And I told my parents, I said, I think they just ruined my life. I didn't know that it was going to be a blessing in disguise, though. And the first formation that the first sergeant came out, he had a laundry list of things that you could do to stay out of trouble, because in Korea you could actually get into some deep trouble. But, he came out and he said there's a wrestling tournament in Camp Casey, which was about 2 hours north of where I was. So I went out there and wrestled in that competition during the weekend, took a couple buddies with me, won that tournament. And then the athletic director, he popped over and said, "Man, who are you?" I just gave him a little bio. He said, "Well, there's another tournament down in Seoul. If you want to go down there, check that tournament out too next weekend." So I did it again. Then he came back again. He was like, "Listen, I haven't seen somebody like you in a long time. So if you put your packet together, I'll send it up for you and see if we can get you ready for All Army," which is a sister program to WCAP. It's a feeder program, basically. And then the guys that were stationed there with me was like, "Man, well, good luck. Hopefully you make this program." Well, 3 weeks later, I got orders to Fort Carson, Colorado. And they asked me, "When you coming back?" I said, I'm not coming back.
Okay.
I'm not coming back. I said, if I'm coming back, I'm coming back to get my stuff, and that's it. And I kept my word. I worked very hard to be at this, the open level and on the senior circuit. And then I got orders to Fort Carson probably about a month after the first U.S. Nationals. And then from that point on, I was in Colorado. So that was in 2005. And then I missed the elk draw in 2005. And the guys were telling me, well, you're in Colorado now. You're in elk Mecca, right? Lots of elk tags here. Put yourself out there. Let's see how good of a hunter you really are. And
Yep.
2006, I dove in head first from North Carolina to where you are now. And throughout that time, I was wrestling, competing, and also trying to fill elk tags every year. So that kind of sums up where I was from North Carolina and then coming into Colorado and how I got hooked into elk hunting.
Yeah. So
Nope,
had you hunted elk
not
before
once,
you came to Colorado?
not once. I and here
Not
we are.
once.
So what
And here we are.
I tackled it like it was a wrestling practice or a wrestling competition, and I put in all my work and hard practice to becoming this not just this person that find elk, but I'm able to call these elk in, and I drove my wife insane. That first entire whole year leading up to September drove her crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. I think the only place that I outside of work, which I work with guys that hunt as well, is a lot of call time happens
Absolutely.
in the truck for me,
Yes, in the truck,
because
at the house,
I do that around the
it's
house and
everywhere with me. At that point, now it's not so much.
yeah.
I pick up the calls and I practice with my son more now than anything. But I don't leading. I did. Last time I really practice as much as I did is when you're leading up to competitions, elk calling competitions. But when I'm getting ready for those competitions, that then I really rev up my practice time. But when I was first cutting my teeth trying to learn,
Right.
elk language, that's when I was practicing like no other. I mean, all the way from 2000 beginning
Right.
of 2006 to maybe 2009, 10, when I was just, all right, I got this honed in. I think we good. At least we could communicate with them.
So let let's talk about that a little bit. And I got like there was like three or four things where I'm like, oh, we got to hit on that. We got to hit on that, right? One of them that you answered, which was, had you ever hunted elk before here, which was a no. And interestingly, like for me, it was very similar. I had never hunted elk. The year before I moved to Colorado was the first year I hunted elk. That was in 2002, and a buddy of mine kind of granted me, access into the good old boys of his dad and a whole bunch of guys that had hunted forever in the same place. Go back to, like how people are so, creatures of habit and stuff. And it was rifle season. And of course, it's like third season. It's cold. You got snow, halfway up your boots and all that. I'm like, this is cool. This is fun. And you go back and you drink beer at night and do stuff like that. And then the next year, I went with just him, and it was the first time I'd ever archery hunted. And I didn't even carry a bow. I
Right.
just went with him like, hell yeah, I'll go. Let's do this. This is fun. And I go in September, and unfortunately, this is one of those good stories. And if you've watched our podcast before, I've told this story. But Labor Day weekend, we go in, we get 2 to 3 miles in, starts raining, rain turns to hail turns to a blizzard, and we end up like with the tent on our face like 3 times in the middle of the night. That's my first archery experience, and somehow you fast forward 20
Yep.
years, and I'm
Yep.
like, this is the best thing ever. Right? And but kind of going back to where I was going to pick up my question, which was, how did you go from you're like, and I find it really cool because I wanted to talk about the parallels because obviously you already mentioned it, number one, which is if you've ever been in, around, or wrestled yourself, there's such a culture behind growing up in that environment, which is a lot of hard work, a lot of blue collar, right? It's constant, continual practice. And you mentioned it in saying, like, I decided that I wanted to become an elk hunter, and then I decided I was going to be an elk caller. Talk about your progression of that, because you basically took a lot of that discipline and things that came from what you were familiar with and said, I'm going to apply those same principles into becoming an elk hunter and an elk caller. How did you determine then, like when you decided, all right, I think I'm a really good elk caller and I'm going to start entering competitions? Like where did that kind of
you
come?
know,
Or
it
was
was
that a
not a target for
you?
me. That was actually a friend pushing me in that direction. And I would hear it year in, year out. Man, when you're calling, I can't tell if you're the bull or he's the bull. You know, you're that good. And how are you doing this on a yearly basis, pulling these bulls across us every single time? And they said, you know, I had a good buddy of mine. His name is Pat. He hunts with me a lot, and he was like, "Bro, I just want you to do it one time." And I said, "Well, if I'm gonna do the competition, I'll go out there and I'll do this one competition. It was in Colorado Springs, and it was put on by Mile High Note Game Calls, the Deesmans. They were really good guys, and
Yeah.
went out there, and it's old school kind of method where you draw a number out of the hat, and I think it was 7 contestants,
Right.
and they said if you draw a number 1, you have to call twice, and that's just to get the judges' ears warmed up. Well, I drew the number 1, and then I ended up drawing the number 5, so I had to
Of
call
course.
twice, and so I get on the stage, nervous like no other. And I don't know why I was so nervous, because I've wrestled on
Yeah.
many wrestling mats in competitions that, are
Right.
your guts are rolling because you're so scared. All right. And then once you slap hands,
Hold on. Like, did it get you there? Can you? Yeah.
I got interrupted a little bit. I
That's all
apologize
right. No,
about that.
you're good. I think a lot of times with the phone, like if you get a text or anything like that, like
Yeah.
it'll pause, and so yeah, no, I think we're still good. We're still recording. I'm still showing that we're running. So
So,
you said as
so
soon
I,
as you slap hands, go.
yes, as soon as you slap hands, the nerves goes
Right.
away, right? Well, when you're calling on that stage, those nerves never go away. I got no clue
Right.
why. They stay with you the whole
Yeah.
time. And so I called the first time, and I was like, okay. And I looked at the crowd as I was, doing my best rendition in
Right.
the woods. So you got 45-second cow sounds and 45-second
Right.
bull sounds at this particular competition. And I was like, well, everybody's looking at me with their mouth dropped wide open, their eyes all big, and they're like, I said that could either mean one or two things. He's horrible,
Yeah.
or he's really
It's one or
good.
the other.
So then,
No word.
yeah. And I go sit down, and my wife was like, "Yeah, you just killed it." And everybody in the doggone stands was like, "Who is this guy?"
Nice.
And then, so everybody goes up, and they start calling, and then I had to call again, and I get the same look. So after the competition, the judges come up to the front, and then they announce the winners from third to first. So number 3 goes up, I'm clapping my hands. Number 2 goes up and clapping my hands. I'm like, well, I probably
Yeah.
lost this one, and then boom, I won this. Contestant number 5 is your winner, right? So then I was talking to the Deesmans, and they were like, man, this your first competition ever? I said, yeah. I said, usually I'm just in the woods,
Right.
elk
Yeah.
woods, right? They were like, they encouraged me to go and check out some other competitions. So then I went to Salt Lake City, and is a regionals, and it was probably about 32 contestants at that particular competition, which was Western Hunt
Yeah.
Expo, which I was just down
Yeah.
there too. But I went down there. This was a couple years ago, so 2019. I went down there, and I got whooped up so bad. It was out of 32 contestants, I finished like 14th, and I went home after that, and I was determined if I was to show up at World Championships, it was going to be a different
Yeah.
me. So I went to practicing like no other for a solid month and a half. And I say that ain't that long leading into that competition, but I was determined that I wasn't going to be beat up like I did at
Right.
Utah. So then then I went to World Championships. We had a lot of fun, and my goal is to beat two people in that bracket at least. And they formulated it where it's like an NCAA
Right.
bracket where you're head to head
Yep.
against somebody, which I felt like the odds would be better in my favor if I'm head to head with
Right.
somebody, because now you're not listening to everybody, you're listening to these two guys.
Yeah. I like
And
that format.
and then they draw, yes, and then they draw a calls out of a hat, right? And you have to mimic those calls, which I really like too, because I was like, well, I know all these calls. Now let's see who's the best at these particular calls, or at least subjectively best at these calls. And because it's judged, right? It ain't the real judge is in the woods,
True.
but you have 7 panels of judges back there, and everybody, is looking for something a little different. I don't know.
Well,
But I went through that bracket, and I absolutely was scared the whole time. And I stepped on stage and I said, I'm just going to do my best. And they called me the bracket buster, because I went through there and just started doing my best calls I could do. And then next thing you know, I made it to day 2, which is the final 4. As soon as you make it to semis, you make it to day 2. And then I ended up winning the competition in 2019. So that was really, really fun. I thought it was a blast, but it's definitely not like being in the woods, for
so
sure.
talk a little bit about that. So a couple of things for if you've never watched any of these. I mean, obviously, YouTube can be really good or really bad, but if you go and search around, a lot of the competitions, and probably including some of the ones you've been through, you can find them there. And what if you've never seen one, what most people don't know is the judges are blinded from the callers. So they're only allowed to use their ears in order to determine what they're hearing. So it doesn't matter if it was you or Donald Duck or whoever on stage. Like, they don't know who's standing up there. So there's at least a level of objectivity that's created from that perspective. But then, like you said, there's some subjectivity based on what each person deems is a better quality or better sound, or what they think matches or mimics real elk. Like you said, the real judge, which is out in the woods. Talk about that a little bit, because I've heard, I've listened to Corey talk about it. I've talked with Dirk, and if you've seen, we had Jason and Dirk on the podcast last year, kind of at the same time, which was kind of fun. I'm sure you know how that goes, right? We'll talk about that next. But how do you take what competition calling looks like, and how has that really changed? Like you said, when you get out to the real judge, which is out in the woods, like, where does that help you, and where is that really kind of those two things differentiate?
Well, when you're on stage, they give you a certain call or calls or time frame to make those calls. So some of those time frames could be 45 seconds if you're in the men's division, or the professional division. It's 45 seconds cow sounds or 45-second bull sounds. If you're at World Championships, they draw the call out of the hat, and that is a particular call that you're making. But we'll just use World Championships as a platform. So when they draw these calls out of the hat, you just do your best to mimic that particular sound. Now, versus being in the woods, my whole thing is first you want to get him to sound off. And then you want to judge his behavior as he sounds off. So if I throw out a location bugle and he answers 500-600 yards away, I don't make another sound until I move and close the distance in. And then I'm going to judge everything I do based off his behavior. And that's a lot different than being on the stage, because I'm not necessarily throwing out a bull bark at this elk, because that's not something I'm opening up the discussion for, right? So, but on stage, they might ask you to do bull barks, and you have to do your best rendition of that bark. But being on stage and being in the woods, totally different. The nerves, though, are pretty same, especially when you get that big bull coming in and he's screaming. If you ain't somewhat kind of nervous, Go do
That's
something
right.
else.
I've yet to be in that situation where I'm like, yeah, this is just normal. Like, I think, and probably most people can think back, like their first time you get close contact with a bull, and he, bugles, screams, whatever, and there's
Yep.
like there's a feeling that like hits you, right? And you just kind of
Yep.
go, whoa, man, like it startles you almost, because you don't realize how much like force and power and volume gets behind that just it's and like you said, if that doesn't like, I always say, like, if that doesn't bend your stinger a little bit, like I don't know what will.
Yes. Yes. And that same kind of feeling you get on the stage
Yeah.
too. So I don't know. I think it's a little bit of like a. I call myself an adrenaline junkie, but it's something of that you get when you see him screaming. But the crazy thing is being able to work through
Right.
that too. Because if you can't work through that, you'll crack under
Right.
pressure.
And like you said, I think that there's another parallel there, which is, where a lot of times successes and failures lie, whether that is on stage or whether that's in the
Right.
woods, right? Like, which is, can you
Right.
maintain keeping your level of focus and your wits about you enough that you're thinking clearly, what's next? Am I in the right position? Am I, and being able to execute under those conditions. And we talk a lot about that with, we've talked about shooting, and there's a huge aspect of that, which we haven't even touched a bow. We're just talking about getting them there, right? And
Right.
so I think, as you mentioned, there's probably a little bit of that, like, adrenaline junkie in all of us, where, I've told a story about, like, the first time I ever drew my bow on an elk, I couldn't even find my peep sight. Like, I literally was just like, I trying to, like, figure it out, and
I've
I'm
been
like,
there.
holy cow, man, like, breathe a little bit. We gotta, like, slow down. And
Hmm.
you don't realize until you get in those moments, like, any running, lifting, shooting, combination of both or whatever, it doesn't match it. And until you get in that situation, and then you really find out, like, how well do you handle those situations.
That's right. That's right. And I believe when you first start off elk hunting, and I'm not just you get it when you get it too when you're whitetail hunting, but when you have a dragon that's bugling his butt off right there in
Yeah.
front of you, I would say that's a lot different than a big whitetail walking
Yeah,
in front of
for
you,
sure.
right? But so at the very beginning of my elk hunting career, I was just like that. Dude, I couldn't see my peep sight. I didn't know if I was doing everything right.